Hello, my name is Lisa Ross, though you may know me better as Paper Daisy Creations, and I am the knitting designer behind the Socks of Green Gables collection. Shown here are the Kindred Spirits socks, and you can find both the pattern and the collection on Ravelry and on paperdaisycreations.com. Today I'm going to be showing you how to work this toe-up contrast heel. And basically what we are going to do, we've already done our gusset increases. You can see those along the side here, right next to my purl bridge. We are going to be working with just the sole stitches. So beginning with the purl stitch and across all the way over to the other purl stitch. So we've got short rows worked back and forth here. It sounds intimidating, it's really not. And then you're going to be working other short rows to close up that heel and create this final heel flap before rejoining in the round and finishing up your beautiful socks. So I have the second sock here ready for the heel, and I am using a long circular needle. I find this to be a really easy way for me to handle making this heel. Now you can also do it on DPNs, you can do it on a 9-inch circular, or you can do it on 2 circulars, whatever your small circumference preference is for needles. On the instep here, I keep those on this needle, which you can see. Let me arrange those. This is my cable patterning right here. And then the sole of the sock has gotten very large. I now have 56 stitches on the sole for my size medium sock. And those stitches work well with having the cord, having the long cord to sort of wrap those around. But it also works very well on double pointed needles. That's another way in which I've made these socks, or on 2 circulars. It is a lot trickier to do this heel on a 9-inch circular, but it can be done as well. So what I'm going to do first is work across the instep in pattern. Now, these instep stitches, which I just worked, are going to be put on hold. I don't have to do anything with them when I'm using them on this circular, or if you have them on a different needle like your DPNs or your circulars. Those stitches you are not going to use until we rejoin in the round much later in the game. So I'm going to work my sole. Now, the way that the sole is worked is there are some stitches that are going to be in the main color before beginning the heel color. And so there's just a few of those, so we're going to go ahead and work those like this. I'm following my pattern, and again, you will have to follow it for your size because there are different numbers for each size. So with my main color, I'm going to do purl 1, and then for size medium, it is knit 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, so I've worked purl 1, knit 3. The next thing I'm going to do is slip 1 with yarn and back. So I slip 1, the yarn is back here, and now my main color is going to be put on hold. I'm ready to join the CC. This is the Navy Blazer colorway by Emma's Yarn, and I'm going to be knitting 34 stitches for size medium. So check your pattern to be sure you have the right numbers. And I'm going to show you how I weave in the ends as I go. So what I've got here is the tail, and I've got the working yarn, and then my main color. And I'm going to take that tail and just put it behind the working yarn so it kind of wraps around it. And I'm going to hold the tail together with the main color and work the next few stitches like this. And that will be one less end to weave in. So I'm going to knit. All right, so I've worked 4 stitches together. So I've got my first stitch, 4 more, and now that tail is secured. I can trim it down after I block the socks. So far I've got 5 stitches. I'm knitting 34. All right, so I've got my 34 stitches finished, and now I'm going to be working the DS, the double stitch. And so in order to work that, I'm going to work the next stitch in pattern. I'm going to turn my work. And then what I want to do is I need to have the yarn in front. So whenever you're doing German short rows, you need to have the working yarn in the front. I slip that stitch purlwise onto the right needle. And now I'm going to pull the yarn up and back. And what it does is creates this double stitch right here. So it's just one stitch, but it has been turned into a double stitch with the way that it's positioned. And what this does is it closes up any gap that might form. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is purl 22. And I am ready to work the double stitch. So the double stitch is going to be worked on the next stitch. I continue to purl, so I work it in pattern. And so for this side, it's going to be a purl. So I work that as a purl stitch. Then I turn my work. I'm now on the right side. And that stitch, which I just worked, is going to become a double stitch. And to do this, I'm going to slip the yarn purlwise onto the right needle. I pull the yarn up and back. So remember, you always have to start, I'm going to show you that again. You have to start with the yarn in the front of the work, slip purlwise, pull up and back, and now I've got a double stitch created right here. So it just comes out of the one stitch. It's only one stitch, but it shows 2 bars, and that is now my double stitch. I'm ready to continue working. So the next part is to knit to the next double stitch. All right, and here I come up on the double stitch, and this one's easy to see because it's in that main color, which we are not using right now. All right, so I'm 1 stitch before the double stitch. Sorry, I accidentally worked it. And now I'm going to work my next DS. And so to do that, I work the next stitch in pattern. So that final stitch before the double stitch, I work it in pattern. I turn, I position the yarn in front of the work, slip purlwise, pull up and back, and now I have my next double stitch. So I have a double stitch here, and I'm going to purl across. All right, so I'm 1 stitch before that double stitch, and you can see it is right here. It pulls a little tighter. Another thing you could do is to mark that double stitch by putting a removable stitch marker on it, just to help you keep track of it. I don't find that to be necessary, but if you are having trouble seeing where that double stitch is, that is a good suggestion. So I work the next stitch in pattern, and for this design, it's going to be purled right there. I've got my double stitch right there. I don't do anything with it just yet. I turn, and now I'm going to keep the yarn in front, slip that stitch, pull up and back, and I'm going to knit across to my double stitch. I'm going to keep on doing this until I have, for my size, I will need 6 unworked stitches between the double stitches. Okay, so we have just finished working our double stitches. You can see I've got them all the way along the left side, all the way along the right side right here. And then I also have just worked a double stitch. I just worked the DS right here on the right needle, and I have 6 stitches in between that have not been worked as double stitches. Now, depending on your size, you may have 4, 6, or 8 unworked stitches. You need to be sure that the yarn has just finished a double stitch and that you're ready to work the right side. So I'm going to knit across those unworked stitches. For me, that number is 6. And now I'm coming to the double stitches. Now remember, even though they have 2 bars, these are going to be worked as a single stitch. So to do that, you need to be sure you're going through both of those bars and working that as a single stitch. So I'm going to work all the way across the double stitches. All right, and here's my final double stitch. I work that stitch and I turn. Now the next part is to purl across the stitches that I just worked and the remaining double stitches. Okay, so I am going to purl. Now that stitch does not have to be worked as a double stitch, and you will see why in just a minute. We're actually creating a gap here, and that visible gap is going to be the marker for our short row heel flap. Okay, so I've purled across the stitches that were previously double stitches. I've purled across the unworked stitches, and now I'm up to these double stitches. Now remember, you have to go under both of those bars in order to correctly knit it, or purl it in this case. And it might take a couple tries. Sometimes I kind of go in and I loosen it up by pulling, and that makes it easier to work that double stitch. And this simple method will create a very wonderfully fitting sock. It's going to be nice and snug around your heel. Feel very comfortable for all the walking you have to do. All right, so I have purled across all of the double stitches, and I will turn it back to the right side. Now it's not spread out very well, but you can see over here there's a visible gap, and we're going to actually be creating one on this other side as well once we do these stitches. All right, so I'm following the instructions in the pattern, and that is going to begin by slipping one with yarn in back. So my yarn is held to the back. I slip that yarn purlwise, and now I'm going to be knitting across to 1 stitch before that visible gap that I just showed you. All right, now on this, I'm up to 1 stitch before the visible gap. On this particular heel, it's easy because the first stitch is in the contrast color, and that other stitch on the other side of the gap is in the main color. So I'm going to be working a slip, slip, knit, and turn. So to do my slip, slip, knit, the way that I do mine is I only slip the first stitch knitwise, and then I purl it, and then I knit it together through the back loop with that next stitch. That's a modified SSK because usually you would slip both of them knitwise, but I find it makes a neater edge if you only slip the first one knitwise. All right, I've got my slip, slip, knit, and now I just turn. And again, that's creating another visible gap, and that is used as our marker for the next row. All right, I have it turned to the wrong side, ready to work the purl row. I want to slip the yarn this time with yarn in front because for this design, I'm always slipping with the yarn held toward the wrong side, which in this case is in the front. So I slip the first stitch, and then I purl across. All right, I am up to the visible gap. This time it's in the contrast color over here. So I'm going to purl these two together, the last stitch and the first stitch between that visible gap. So I purl those together and turn. And I'm going to continue working that last row that I just did, working back and forth, and it's just going to create a rectangular heel flap right up the side that will look like this when finished. So I've got this nice edge right here, beautiful edge right here, and I'm going to be working that right up until the final row when I will have to close the gap to join it in the round. All right, now I have finished working the last row 2 of the heel flap. So I've got my rectangular shaped heel flap. Down here is my turned heel, and I am ready to connect the contrast color heel back to the main color. So I don't need the contrast color anymore. I'm going to go ahead and snip that, set that aside. And now I'm only using the main color, and you can either weave this in as you go, or you can tuck it in there and weave it in with a tapestry needle later, which is what I'm going to do in this case. All right, so when we began the heel, we had some stitches left here, and then we slipped the last main color stitch. So what I'm going to do is put that slipped stitch back onto the left needle, and my main color is ready to work right there. So I'm going to knit 2 together using the last contrast color, the first contrast color stitch and the final main color stitch. I knit those together, and now I'm going to knit across the heel to the opposite side. All right, now I'm at the very last contrast color stitch. I'm going to do an SSK, working that with the next stitch of the main color. And again, I'm using my modified SSK, though a regular SSK would work as well. So I slip the first stitch knitwise, and then I'm going to knit these 2 together through the back loop. Got an extra strand there. There we go. And I am almost finished with the round. I have to knit to the last stitch, which is my purl ridge. I will purl that, and my heel is complete. So that is all finished. I have connected the heel in both places. I have rejoined it to work in the round, and I can continue on up the leg of the sock. This tutorial was for the Kindred Spirits socks, which you can find on both Ravelry and on paperdaisycreations.com. They are toe-up socks, worked with some fun textures, a contrast color heel toe, and then some little friendship rings around the ankles. Happy knitting!